Welcome to another episode of The Catholic Novel. Today we're going to deal with a novel called No Reason for Murder. It's a Japanese novel by Ayaka Sono. I'm going to mention the names of the two characters, the main characters, because otherwise I'm afraid I'll confuse the names. Fujio is the man and Yukiko is the female. Now, confession is good, so I'm going to make a confession. I run a Catholic novel adult education course, and I think over the last 30 years we've read more than 100 novels. We either read them or reread them. But I picked this novel for the course without having read it. And I hope I never do that again. That's a mistake. It's probably the most difficult novel of this series of novels on television. I shouldn't say probably. It is the most difficult. And I had great difficulty with it. So for the adult education course, I give some of the lectures, but then I ask other people to give one. And the lady that gave the lecture on this saw so much more in this novel than I did. I found it very, very demanding. It's over 400 pages. And there are all kinds of symbols in it, which she picked up and I didn't. You're probably wondering why I'm giving the lecture and she isn't. Well, I asked her if it was okay if I used her material. I think that the novel is difficult for a couple of reasons. And one of them is it's very much steeped in in Japanese culture. And the author is a very prolific Catholic writer. She's written novels, she's written columns in the paper. This particular novel was a serial in a paper, then became the novel, then was put on television. And what I didn't pick up, and my friend who gave the lecture for the course did, is the author is constantly criticizing Japanese culture, that it's too materialistic, that some of the parents are not doing their jobs with their families. In the novel, it's the story of a serial killer. And it's kind of amazing how young ladies get into his car without even thinking twice how dangerous it is. And that's part of what the author is saying. You know, the families are not doing their job. Now, the basic theme, I'm going to take a crack at the basic theme, okay? The man, Fujio, is a serial killer, loosely based on an actual serial killer in Japan. But this is not a history, this is a novel. So the author plays with the facts a great deal. So that's the one character. And he meets Yukiko, who's a Catholic, a seamstress, a very good human being. And from the first time they meet, she senses there's something strange about him. And then as the novel develops, he murders several young ladies. And I mentioned, you know, the title in Japanese is not No Reason for Murder, but in English it's a terrific title because it's completely irrational, which I guess is true of all serial killers. If you've ever heard any of them interviewed, you know they don't make a great deal of sense. You know, I had to kill this person because she had blonde hair, or I had to kill this person because God told me to do it, and so on. Now, I very much enjoy doing this series. For me, it's really a labor of love. Except for this one, No Reason for Murder, all these novels that I've picked, I have read before. And what I'm finding out is how often they're on my mind because of this series. Now, most of the work for this series is done by 4 cameramen and my producer, Mike Agan. I just show up and start talking, and they take the pictures. But I've noticed things I have read years ago, and perhaps even reread years ago. When I'm reading them now, something jumps off the page at me. And something jumped off the page at me in preparing this particular lecture. It's a quotation from Flannery O'Connor, who is considered by many critics the greatest Catholic fiction writer of the 20th century. I remember one secular critic said, in years to come, the one religious writer we will still be talking about is Flannery O'Connor. Now, this quote I'm going to give is from a book called Mystery and Manners, which is a collection of her essays. I like this book more than I like her 2 novels. Her 2 novels are The Violent Bear It Away and Wise Blood. But she's got some wonderful insights into fiction writing. So this quote is about writing fiction, okay? And it's from a book, Mystery and Manners, which is a collection of Flannery O'Connor's writing. So here's the quote. There is no excuse for anyone to write fiction for public consumption unless he has been called to do so by the presence of a gift. It is the nature of fiction not to be good for much unless it is good in itself. A gift of any kind is a considerable responsibility. It is a mystery in itself, something gratuitous and wholly undeserved, something whose real uses will probably always be hidden from us. Usually, the artist has to suffer certain deprivations in order to use his gift with integrity. Art is a virtue of the practical intellect, and the practice of any virtue demands a certain asceticism and a very definite leaving behind of the superficial and so on. Okay? Now, I'm imagining the author, Ayaka Sono, what it must have cost her to write this novel, to fill it with these symbols, to fill it with criticism of Japanese culture, and never to be preaching. You know, there's nothing in this novel which anyone could say is proselytizing, okay? Okay, so she apparently has this gift, and all writers of fiction do, according to Flannery O'Connor. Now that gift is then exercised in writing the text, and then that gift is given to the readers. And this has caused me to start thinking how much Catholic novels have affected my own consciousness, and how much they're affecting my own consciousness right now because of doing this series. So the first attitude perhaps I should have toward all these novelists is gratitude. Because they're Catholic novels, and there is always this dimension of the transcendent. As I mentioned in some of the lectures, in some of the Catholic novels, God is the main character. But in all of the Catholic novels, God is present. And who knows how much that has affected me? I do not know, but I have a sense that it's been a tremendous gift to my consciousness and to my conscience. We did a number of novels about priests. Who knows how much they played into my vocation to be a priest? So what I'm calling your attention to is the wonder of the Catholic novel. Okay, now that was the first quote I wanted from Flannery O'Connor. Here's the second. Flannery O'Connor used to describe herself as a hillbilly Thomist. Okay. And she loves St. Thomas. And this paragraph I'm going to read now is her reflection on something St. Thomas said. So here it is. St. Thomas called art reason in making. This is a very cold and very beautiful definition. And if it is unpopular today, this is because reason has lost ground among us. As grace and nature have been separated, so imagination and reason have been separated. And this always means an end to art. The artist uses his reason to discover an answering reason in everything he sees. For him, to be reasonable is to find in the object, in the situation, in the sequence, the spirit which makes it itself. So the whole idea of a Catholic author having a vocation, and that vocation then may very well influence our vocations. That's been on my mind lately. Now let me get back specifically to No Reason for Murder. It's not an easy novel to read. As this serial killer kills these people, you may be tempted to say, I don't want to read any further. But I want to offer you an interpretation. You know, what is this about? What's the main theme here? Well, to articulate that, let me refer to a wedding I once officiated at. I was not the church's witness. I gave the homily. But the priest who was the church's witness said a couple of words before he presented the vows to the couple. And he said, you never want to enter anyone's life without bringing God with you. And that came to me as I was reading this novel. I think this is the theme, that in some mysterious way, the faith and goodness of Yukiko touches the serial killer. Now, there's no big conversion scene, okay? But I think it's clear that by the end of the novel, he has become a bit more human. He's been transformed to some extent. And at one point, after he's caught and he's waiting to be hung, Yukiko and he communicate with letters. And he makes a point that he wants her to say, he's so mixed up. He's so sick, really. You know, you even wonder if he has a conscience. He asks her, do you love me? Can you say you love me? And she says it. And so by the end of the novel, we're getting some symbols of grace and God, and I think even resurrection. So I think there's a quote-unquote conversion. If I were writing the novel, I would make it much more dramatic. I would probably make him convert to Catholicism and go to confession and so on. Nothing like that happens, but something happens. And that's why I think the novel may be much, much better than I experienced it. I found it tough to get through, I found it long, and I kept waiting for a more obvious and clear reference to Catholicism. But I think it's there. I think it's there, and I think this young lady I had who gave the lecture, she saw it much more clearly. And she worked much, much, much harder than I have worked on this now. She had notes and notes and notes. And she had a habit of putting little stickers and pages that she wanted to get back to. And there must have been 50 stickers, okay? So part of the obstacle is it's a lot about Japanese culture, which I know very little about. Another part of the difficulty is, without preaching, the novelist is attacking certain materialistic tendencies in Japanese culture. And in that sense, she's using the novel to teach, and I think that's okay. I think in every novel, there's a vision of human nature. And in Catholic novels, there's a vision of human nature, and there is a vision of God. And I don't think that's preaching, I don't think that's proselytizing. In one of these talks, I quoted Frank Sheed, the late theologian, the publisher of Sheed and Ward, and he said in one of his books, theology is seeing reality as it is. And I think that's what great novelists do. They see what the rest of us may miss, and then they present it to us in a story. I'm not going to read a third quote from Flannery O'Connor, but I'll say this because I think it's really right on target. She says, in fiction, the work of fiction has to be considered as a whole. It's got to be integral. It's got to have a certain kind of an integrity. And the quote-unquote message or morality or vision is in the story. And I'm so impressed by that because I can't do it. I mean, I can give a homily, I can give a sermon, I can give a class. But to write a story in such a way that it's not preaching, not a catechism, not a homily, and yet there's something there that is speaking, something very important that is speaking to the reader. I think that's great, you know. So whether we sum up Catholic novels as tremendous mysteries or tremendous, well, actually, Andrew Greeley almost comes out and says they're sacraments. They're works of art that help us to think about God, works of art that illuminate our experience. And that's been my, I'm not kidding when I say this series has been a labor of love for me. All the work is done by my producer and the technicians, the cameramen. But I have the feeling I am receiving much more than I am giving. So with all my warnings, if you want to take a crack at No Reason for Murder, you may get more out of it than I did, and you may not find it as difficult. But just a reminder, it's long, and in the scenes, the murder scenes, the title fits perfect. There's no reason for these, and that can be quite depressing. But ultimately, grace shines through. So if you're interested, take a look at Ayaka Sono's No Reason for Murder.